Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to the lecture on data visualization using Ggplot. In this lecture, we are going to see how to generate histograms and bar plot, and we'll also see how to include additional variables in these plots. Before we move further, let's look at the data that we have. We are continuing with the same data that we used in the last class, which is the peoplechum case.csv file, and this is the data that we used to generate scatter plots. So we are going to continue with the same data. Now this has a total size of 14,999 rows and 10 columns, which means there are 14,999 records and 10 attributes. So you have the variables and the description here. So a small recap of what we did in the last lecture. We imported the data into R. Now this was in a CSV format, so we used the function read.csv, and the input to this function is the file. So this loads the data and reads the file in a table format, and it creates a data frame from it. So to access the data frame HR, you can go to the environment, and if you click on this data frame HR, you will see a pop-up. Now the pop-up looks similar to the snippet that's shown below. Due to space constraint, we've shown only a few records, but you will actually see more records there. So this is the entire gist of the data. So then we looked at the structure of the data. From here we could conclude that there were 5 variables, namely number of projects, time spent company, work accident, left, and promotion in last 5 years, which were read as integers, and that was because of the nature of data that was present. All of these had integers, but technically these are categories because there's only a limited number of values in each of these variables. So these variables can be seen like qualitative integers, and hence we converted them to categorical variable using the function as.factor. So let's see what a histogram is. Now a histogram is used to represent the distribution of a numerical data. So all integers and numerical data types fall under this category. This is an example of a histogram, and it was generated for the variable satisfactory level from this data that we are using. So as we go further, we will see how to generate this histogram using the function given in Ggplot. So here on the histogram, on the x-axis you have the satisfactory level, on the y-axis you have the count. So each of the vertical bars that you are seeing here are called bins, and the width of the bin is fixed. You can change it. You can also give a constant bin width. So basically what happens is that the entire range of data is split based on the bin width. So the bin values, like I said, can be equal or unequal. Now you can have an equal bin width or you can have an unequal bin width. And the height of each of the bin is proportional to the frequency, which is the count or the number of values that fall into each bin. So this is how an histogram is defined. So a histogram is used only for a numerical variable, and let's see how to now generate a histogram using the Ggplot2 package. So before we move further, you need to load the library before you can use any of the function. So I'm just loading the package Ggplot2 using the function library. And now I'm going to generate a histogram for the variable average monthly hours. So this is a variable for which we are going to generate a histogram. So let's begin by mapping the data and the variables. Now to map the data and the variables, we are going to be using the Ggplot2 function. Now under the parameter data, I'm going to give the data frame name, which is HR. And under the aesthetic function represented by AES, I'm going to map the x-axis. Now the x-axis is given by the parameter x, and I'm going to call it as average monthly hours. Another point to note here is that there is only one variable here, that is we are going to mention only the x-axis here. The y-axis is the count or the frequency, so that is something that is automatically computed, we don't have to give it. Once you execute the previous command, what you will see is just a grid, and this can be accessed under the tab plots. So you have only the grid here with all the axes labeled. So the entire range of data is also set, and the average monthly hours label is also placed. Now what happens is, to generate the second layer, which is actually the histogram, you need to use a command called geom_histogram. Now here you will see a snippet of the code. The highlighted part is the only additional part that you have to type. The first layer remains the same. The first layer is with Ggplot, where I mapped the data and the axis. And to add the second layer, you need to add a plus symbol here and then give the second layer. So the second layer is the geom_histogram command that I'm giving. You need to mention a bin width. Now this bin width can be equal or unequal. So when you want equal bin width, then you can just mention the bin width. But when you want an unequal bin width, then you need to give the sequence in which you want the bin width to be spaced out. The next parameter is call, which is color, and the input is black here. So this represents the outline that has to be drawn to each of these bins. And the fill color is given as blue, which is the color that is used to fill these bins. The next layer that I'm adding is basically the title, the X and the Y label. So the title is given by labs, and I'm calling the title as histogram for satisfactory level. And within this function, I'm supplying the value for X and Y axis. The X axis is the satisfactory level, and the Y axis I'm calling it as count. Now instead of the function labs, you can also use ggtitle, in which case you need to use the X label and the Y label separately. So these are two different functions, so you can use either of these. Now once you execute this command, what you will see is a histogram, and that I have represented as a snippet on the right. So this is how your histogram looks. You can see that the X axis is satisfactory level, Y is count, and you can see the corresponding frequency for each of the bins. So this is how a histogram is generated using the Ggplot2 package. So now let's see how to generate the bar plot using the Ggplot2 package. A bar plot is used to represent categorical data. So just like how we use histogram to represent numerical data, we are going to use a bar plot for categorical data. So this is the primary difference between a bar plot and a histogram. A histogram is used to represent the distribution of a numerical data, whereas a bar plot is used to represent the frequency distribution for a categorical data. So what you see below is an example of a bar plot. So as we go further in the lecture, we'll see how to generate this bar plot. Now here I've used the variable left from this data, and on the y-axis you have the frequency. Now these bars are vertical here. You can also have horizontal bars. So the height or length of the bar corresponds to a frequency or the number of occurrences of each particular category. And a third variable can also be introduced in the bar plot by color encoding. So before moving further, you need to load the library. If you are on the same script file as earlier, then you can just skip this step. It is enough to load the package just once in the beginning, and after that you can use any of the functions from the package. So we are going to be looking at the frequency distribution for the variable left, and we are going to start by mapping the data and the variables. So we are going to use the function ggplot, map the data as HR, and under aesthetic I am going to map X as left. Now in this case again we are going to map only one variable. So all your categories are going to be on the X axis, and on the Y axis you are going to see the corresponding counts or frequency. Once you execute the command, all you see is a grid with the variable mapped as left. So you have this categories here 0 and 1, and this can be found under the plots tab. Now to generate the second layer, which is actually the bar plot, you need to use the function geom_bar. So let's see how the function geom_bar is defined. Now here you can see that the first layer is what we had executed earlier. So to add the second layer, you need to add a plus notation here. So here I have the geom_bar function. So the color is black, which is going to be the outline for the bars, and the fill color is red. So the next layer I've added is the title, X and the Y axis. Now that can be done using the function labs. Now I'm calling the title of the plot as bar plot for the variable left. The X axis I'm calling as the variable left, and the Y axis I'm calling it as count. This is the variable. It has two categories 0 and 1, and the corresponding frequencies can be found under the Y axis, which I'm called it as count. So this is how a bar plot looks, and once you execute it, you should be able to get the bar plot that's given on the right. So let's understand how to introduce a third variable by color encoding. Now the idea is to basically add a third layer as a variable and see how does it impact, the output of the existing command. So we are going to introduce a third variable called salary, which is categorical. Now salary is a categorical variable, so it has three categories, which is high, low and medium. So let's understand what are the parameters that we have to change to the existing geom_bar command. Now we are going to give this fill parameter under the aesthetic function. Now under the aesthetic function, you need to mention fill is equal to name of the variable. I'm going to fill these colors based on the categories in salary. and I'm changing the title as bar plot for left and salary. So it's going to be a combination of two variables. The x-axis and the y-axis remain the same. So once you execute this command, what you will see is a bar plot. Now in that, corresponding count is given for those employees with salary equal to high, low and medium. So one thing to note here is that on the y-axis you have count. Now this makes it very hard for you to really interpret, right? So we are going to convert this y-axis to percentage now so that we can interpret the plot a little better. So let's see how to introduce that. What you see here is the highlighted part, and that is the only additional part that you need to change. So your color remains black, and under aesthetic your fill remains as salary. Now you just need to add an extra comma here, and your y-axis basically becomes count by sum of count. So your count is each of these frequencies, that divided by the total frequency gives you the proportion. So your y-axis after this step is basically proportion. So it becomes proportion. Now to convert it to percentage, outside this layer I add a plus notation and give the function scale underscore y underscore continuous. Now here I am calling the labels as percent, so that converts the y-axis to percentage. The title and the x-axis remain the same. I have changed the y-axis to percent alone. So let's summarize. In this lecture we saw what are histograms and bar plots. We understood the primary difference between histograms and bar plots. Histograms are basically used where you have a numerical data, whereas bar plots are used when you have a categorical data. And we also saw how to add a description to the plots, the title and the axis, and we understood the effect of adding a third variable to a bar plot, and we also saw how to convert the frequency to percentage in a bar plot. Thank you.